I had just given birth when my 8-year-old daughter slipped quietly into my hospital room. Instead of running to hug me, Lily pulled the privacy curtain closed. Then she leaned close and whispered, "Mom, hide under the bed right now." Before I could ask why, she was already tugging at my arm. We lowered ourselves to the floor, my body screaming from 20 hours of labor, and crawled beneath the hospital bed. Footsteps stopped outside my door. Lily's whole body trembled. Then she pressed her hand over my mouth. "My name is Rachel Bennett, and until that morning, I believed I understood the people I loved. I was 38 years old, married to Daniel for 11 years, and lying in a maternity ward in Columbus, Ohio, with my newborn son sleeping in the bassinet beside the bed. We had named him Noah after my father, who had died 3 years earlier. His birth should have been one of the happiest days of my life. It had taken us 4 years, 2 miscarriages, and more appointments than I could count to get there. Daniel had cried when the doctor placed Noah on my chest. At least, I thought those were real tears. He kissed my forehead, took a dozen pictures, and told every nurse who entered the room that I was the strongest woman he knew. By noon, he said he needed to leave for an hour. "Paperwork at the office," he explained, pulling on his navy coat. "Nothing that can't wait, but I want everything cleared before you and Noah come home." I remember smiling at him. "You're incapable of resting, aren't you?" He grinned, kissed me again, and said, "That's why you married me." Daniel was a financial advisor, the kind of man who remembered birthdays, wore polished brown shoes, and knew exactly how to make older clients feel safe. People trusted him because he looked trustworthy. I did too. His mother, Evelyn, had spent most of my pregnancy hovering nearby with casseroles, advice, and questions about our estate plan. She called it concern. I called it exhausting, though I usually kept that thought to myself. Lily arrived around 2 with my neighbor, Mrs. Carter. The moment my daughter stepped into the room, I knew something was wrong. She did not look at the baby. Normally, Lily would have rushed straight to me, talking too fast and asking whether she could hold her brother. Instead, she stood with one hand wrapped around the strap of her purple backpack, breathing as though she had run all the way from the elevator. She looked behind her. Then, she shut the door. After we crawled under the bed, I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. Lily's hand was small, but she held it firmly over my mouth. Her eyes were wide and wet. The door opened. From where I lay, all I could see were shoes, Daniel's polished brown ones, Evelyn's black low heels, and a third pair white hospital clogs. A woman's voice said, "We don't have much time." Daniel answered quietly, "Is everything ready? There won't be any complications." Evelyn exhaled. "And the cameras?" "Not in this room." My stomach turned cold. Then Daniel stepped closer to the bed and said words I would hear in my nightmares for years. "Once Rachel is gone, everything comes to me." Lily squeezed my face tighter as my breath caught. Evelyn whispered, "And the baby changes everything." At that moment, someone knocked sharply on the door. "Mrs. Bennett," a nurse called. "I'm coming in to check your vitals." The 3 pairs of shoes moved fast. The door opened, then closed again. Lily removed her hand from my mouth. Neither of us spoke. We simply stared at each other beneath that hospital bed, knowing that whatever family we had entered that room, believing in, no longer existed. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving only the steady hum of the air conditioner and the rapid pounding of my heart. For a second, neither Lily nor I moved. I could barely breathe, not because of the awkward position beneath the hospital bed, but because my mind refused to accept what I had just heard. Daniel, my husband, the man who had held my hand through labor, the father of both my children, there had to be another explanation. There simply had to be. A second knock came, followed immediately by the door opening. "Mrs. Bennett, it's Melissa. I'm just here to check your blood pressure." Lily looked at me. I nodded very carefully, trying not to cry out from the pain that shot through my abdomen. I crawled out from beneath the bed. Every muscle protested. 20 hours of labor had left my body weak, and lowering myself to the floor had been difficult enough. Climbing back onto the hospital bed felt almost impossible. Melissa, a middle-aged nurse with kind eyes and silver streaks in her dark hair, smiled as she entered. "There you are," she said pleasantly. "Your husband said you were resting." I forced a weak smile. I slipped getting out of bed. "Oh, honey, Don't do that by yourself. She adjusted my pillow. You've just delivered a baby. Ring for us. That's what we're here for. I glanced toward Noah. He was still asleep in the clear bassinet beside my bed, his tiny chest rising and falling with peaceful little breaths. Looking at him steadied me. Melissa wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. Everything all right? She asked gently. For one terrifying moment, I almost told her everything. I almost repeated Daniel's words. I almost asked whether the woman in white hospital clogs actually worked here. But what exactly would I say? That I'd hidden under my own hospital bed because my 8-year-old daughter was frightened, that I'd overheard half a conversation without seeing anyone's face. Melissa would probably think I was exhausted, emotional, or suffering from medication after childbirth. Instead, I swallowed my fear. I'm just tired, she nodded knowingly. Every new mom says that. After checking my vitals, she smiled at Lily. You must be the proud big sister. Lily managed a tiny nod. Melissa left a few minutes later, promising to return before dinner. The room fell silent again. I looked at my daughter. Lily, I whispered, tell me everything. She climbed carefully onto the chair beside my bed, twisting the zipper pull on her backpack over and over. I wasn't trying to listen, she said quickly. I know. I got lost. She stared at the floor. I couldn't find your room after Mrs. Carter took me off the elevator. I thought I remembered the hallway. Her voice trembled. Then I heard Dad. She looked up at me. He didn't know I was there. I reached for her hand. What did you hear? I was behind the corner. Grandma Evelyn was there too. She paused, trying to remember every word. Dad said, once she's gone. Her voice became almost a whisper. Grandma said, everything comes to you. My skin prickled. And then Dad said, she closed her eyes tightly, the baby changes everything. Exactly the words I had heard beneath the bed. Not similar. Exactly, there was another lady. Lily continued. She was wearing blue scrubs. Did you recognize her? She shook her head. No. Was she a nurse? I don't think so. What makes you say that? Lily frowned. She didn't have one of those computers that the nurses carry. That was true. Every nurse I'd seen all morning carried either a tablet or a clipboard. What was she carrying? Lily hesitated. Then she looked directly into my eyes. She had a little plastic bracelet. I frowned. What kind of bracelet? The kind babies wear. The room suddenly felt several degrees colder. Lily swallowed hard. It was really tiny. She held 2 fingers about 4 in apart, and she kept looking at it. I slowly turned toward Noah's bassinet. His own identification bracelet rested securely around his tiny ankle. Every newborn in the maternity ward wore one. Why would an unfamiliar woman be carrying another infant bracelet? Before I could ask another question, voices drifted into the hallway outside my room. One of them belonged unmistakably to Daniel. The other was the same unfamiliar woman's voice. They had come back. I instinctively reached for Lily's hand. Neither of us spoke. Daniel's voice drifted through the closed door, calm and familiar, exactly the same tone he used when reassuring anxious clients. Just give us another few minutes. The woman answered too softly for me to make out every word. Then I heard footsteps moving away. Only after the hallway fell quiet again did I realize I had been holding my breath. Lily leaned closer. Mom, are we going home with Dad? The question pierced me more deeply than anything I had heard that afternoon. I wanted to tell her yes. I wanted to tell her everything was a misunderstanding. Instead, I kissed the top of her head. We're going to be careful. That was the only promise I could honestly make. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of nurses checking my incision, lactation consultants helping Noah feed for the first time, and well-meaning hospital staff congratulating us. Daniel finally returned carrying flowers, a coffee for himself, and a stuffed blue elephant for Noah. He looked exactly like the husband I'd known for more than a decade. He smiled. He laughed with the nurses. He adjusted my blanket. He even rubbed my shoulders. If I hadn't heard his conversation, if Lily hadn't heard it first, I would have believed every gesture. You look exhausted, he said softly. I feel exhausted, he chuckled. Parenting 2 kids is going to be an adventure. I searched his face for guilt, for fear, for anything. I found nothing. His expression was warm, relaxed, almost affectionate. That frightened me even more. A guilty man acting nervous would have made sense. A man calmly pretending nothing had happened was far more dangerous. Evelyn arrived half an hour later, carrying homemade chicken soup in a thermal container. "My poor girl," she said, kissing my forehead. "You need real food, not hospital food." She looked exactly as she always had, perfectly styled silver hair, pearl earrings, and a cardigan that somehow never had a wrinkle. She smiled at Noah, she smiled at Lily. Then she smiled at me. The same woman who only hours earlier had quietly asked whether the cameras covered my hospital room. I forced myself to smile back. If they believed I knew nothing, they might become careless. That thought stayed with me for the rest of the visit. Late that evening, after visiting hours ended, Daniel finally went home to shower and sleep. Evelyn left with him. Lily had already gone home with Mrs. Carter. For the first time all day, I was alone, almost. Noah slept peacefully beside me. I picked up my phone and opened the Notes app. Instead of trying to make sense of everything, I wrote down every detail I could remember. The exact words, the order in which they were spoken, the time Daniel left, the time Lily arrived, the description of the woman in scrubs. I even noted the color of the hospital clogs. Memory fades. Evidence shouldn't. My father had taught me that years earlier when he owned a small construction company. People remember feelings. He used to say courtrooms remember details. I suddenly wished he were still alive. He would have known exactly what to do. Around 9 that night, a young nurse wheeled Noah to the nursery for his routine newborn hearing screening. "We'll only be gone about 20 minutes, she assured me. The moment they left, I sat upright despite the pain. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I was looking for patterns. Over the past year, how many decisions had Daniel encouraged? The answer unsettled me. He had insisted we increase my life insurance after I became pregnant. "It protects the family," he'd said. He persuaded me to update my will. He recommended consolidating several investment accounts under paperwork that he conveniently prepared himself. Even stranger, he repeatedly discouraged me from discussing our financial planning with my longtime attorney. "I handle this professionally every day," he'd laughed. "We don't need to pay someone else." At the time, it had sounded practical. Now, each memory slid into place, like another piece of a puzzle I had never realized I was solving. None of those decisions had frightened me individually. Together, they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. When Noah returned safely to my room, relief washed over me so intensely that tears filled my eyes. I wasn't crying because he was back. I was crying because I suddenly understood something terrifying. If Daniel had spent months quietly arranging our finances, then whatever I had overheard that afternoon hadn't been an impulsive decision. It had been a plan, and plans that take months to build rarely stop after their first failure. Before midnight, while the hospital floor grew quiet, I searched my contacts and found the number I hadn't needed in years. Margaret Ellis, my father's attorney. Not Daniel's, mine. My thumb hovered over the call button. At 8:00 the next morning, I intended to make the most important phone call of my life. I barely slept that night. Every time a cart rolled down the hallway, or a door opened somewhere on the maternity floor, my eyes flew open. Noah slept peacefully beside me, making the soft little sounds newborns make. Tiny sighs, gentle squeaks, the occasional stretch that seemed impossibly small. I watched him for hours, not because I was simply a new mother, because I was suddenly afraid someone might try to take him away. At exactly 8, after the morning shift changed and my nurse stepped out to retrieve my breakfast tray, I picked up my phone and called Margaret Ellis. She answered on the third ring. "Margaret Ellis, it's Rachel Bennett." There was a brief pause. "Rachel, I thought you were having your baby this week." "I did." "Oh, sweetheart, congratulations. Thank you." My voice cracked. "I need your help." The warmth disappeared from her tone immediately. "What happened?" I glanced toward the closed hospital door. "I don't think I should explain over the phone." Another pause. Then she spoke carefully. "Are you in immediate danger?" I don't know. Can anyone hear you?" "I don't think so." Rachel, answer only yes or no. "Do you believe someone may be trying to harm you or your child?" I closed my eyes. Yes. I'll be there within an hour." She hung up. No unnecessary questions, no disbelief, just action. That was one of the reasons my father had trusted Margaret for nearly 30 years. She never panicked. She solved problems. Margaret arrived just after 9, carrying nothing more than a leather briefcase and a paper cup of coffee. She looked exactly as I remembered, early 60s, silver hair cut neatly at her shoulders, calm blue eyes behind thin reading glasses. When the nurse left us alone, Margaret quietly locked the hospital room door. Then she pulled a small legal pad from her briefcase. Start from the beginning. I told her everything. The labor, Daniel leaving, Lily getting lost, the whispered conversation, the woman in blue scrubs, the infant bracelet, the words beneath the bed. Margaret interrupted only twice. Repeat the exact sentence. Don't paraphrase. When I finished, she remained silent for nearly a full minute. Finally, she asked, Rachel, has Daniel encouraged any major financial changes recently? A chill ran through me. Several. I described the life insurance policy, the revised estate documents, the investment accounts, his insistence that I didn't need outside legal advice. Margaret slowly nodded. Did you sign everything? Most of it? Do you have copies? I think so. We'll review every page. She closed in the legal pad. I want to be very clear. What you've described isn't proof of a crime. I know, but it is enough to justify protecting yourself while we determine what's actually happening. Relief flooded through me. She believed me. Not completely, not blindly, but enough to take the situation seriously. Margaret made 3 phone calls before leaving the room. The first was to a licensed private investigator she had worked with for years. The second was to a retired Columbus police lieutenant, who now specialized in corporate fraud investigations. The third surprised me. She asked to speak with the hospital's patient advocacy office, not security, the patient advocacy. After hanging up, she explained why. If someone inside this hospital is helping an outsider, confronting security too early could alert the wrong person. That possibility hadn't even occurred to me. I felt another wave of nausea. From this moment forward, Margaret continued, don't accuse Daniel of anything. I wasn't planning to. Good. Should I tell the nurses? Only if there's an immediate threat. She leaned forward. If Daniel believes you know nothing, he'll behave naturally. And if he doesn't, then he'll change his plan. She looked directly into my eyes. I'd rather investigate the plan he's already using than force him to invent a new one. That afternoon, while Noah slept against my chest, a hospital volunteer delivered flowers from Daniel. The card read, You and our little miracle are my whole world. Love always, Daniel. I stared at the elegant handwriting. Just 24 hours earlier, those words would have made me cry with happiness. Now they made my skin crawl. About an hour later, Margaret texted me. Our investigator has already confirmed one unusual fact. A second message appeared almost immediately. The woman Lily described does not appear on today's employee roster. My heartbeat quickened. Then a third message arrived. We're checking surveillance footage and visitor logs now. Do not mention this to anyone. I slowly looked toward the hallway outside my room. Somewhere in this hospital, a woman wearing borrowed scrubs had walked its corridors carrying an infant identification bracelet. And according to the first piece of evidence we had found, she had never been authorized to be there in the first place. Margaret called just after sunrise the following morning. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. Rachel, we've confirmed several things. I instinctively tightened my arms around Noah, who was sleeping peacefully after his early feeding. I'm listening. The woman wasn't simply visiting the maternity floor. A pause. She never should have been inside the hospital. I felt my stomach knot. Our investigator identified her. Another pause. Her name is Denise Harper. She worked as a nursing assistant years ago. Worked. Her license was revoked after she falsified patient records. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. A woman with a history of falsifying medical records had somehow walked into the maternity ward on the very day my son was born. How did she get in? We're still trying to answer that. By late morning, Margaret and the private investigator Tom Reynolds arrived together. Tom was in his late 50s, soft-spoken with the patient manner of someone who had spent decades interviewing people, instead of intimidating them. He spread several printed photographs across the small table beside my hospital bed. This is Denise. I immediately recognized the woman, not her face. I had never seen it clearly, but the blue scrubs, the white clogs, the silver tote bag Lily had described. Security cameras caught her entering through an employee entrance yesterday morning with an employee badge. Tom nodded. Not her own. He slid another photograph toward me. She followed someone else through a restricted door. So, someone helped her. Almost certainly. The realization sent a chill through me. This wasn't one dishonest outsider. Someone inside the hospital appeared to be cooperating. Tom continued. There's something else. He placed a floor map of the maternity unit on the table. 3. I requested surveillance footage from every hallway Denise walked through, and one camera recorded her entering this corridor. His finger moved across the map. The next camera should have recorded her leaving. It didn't. It couldn't. Why? The footage was deleted. The room suddenly felt impossibly quiet. Deleted. Only 11 minutes. He looked directly at me. Just enough time for someone to disappear. I remembered Evelyn asking one simple question beneath my hospital bed and the cameras. At the time, I thought she was merely curious. Now, I realized she had probably been checking whether the plan could unfold without being recorded. Margaret opened a folder containing copies of my estate documents. We've also reviewed the paperwork Daniel prepared over the last year. She turned several pages toward me. Nothing here is illegal. I frowned. But there is a pattern. She pointed to highlighted sections. If you died unexpectedly, Daniel would temporarily control nearly every financial decision involving your estate. I swallowed hard. What about Noah? Your father's trust activates additional protections after the birth of another child. I looked down at my sleeping son. So that's what Evelyn meant. Margaret nodded slowly. The baby changes everything. Neither of us had to explain the sentence anymore. For the first time, it actually made sense. That afternoon, my pediatric nurse, Karen, entered to prepare Noah for his discharge examination. She was in her early 60s, calm, efficient, and clearly the kind of nurse who noticed details other people overlooked. She gently lifted Noah's tiny foot. Then she stopped. Her smile disappeared. That's odd. My heart skipped. What is? Karen looked closely at the identification bracelet around Noah's ankle. Without saying another word, she picked up his bassinet chart. She compared the numbers. Then she checked his mother's identification band around my wrist. Her expression changed completely. I'll be right back. She hurried from the room. I stared after her, terrified. Less than 3 minutes later, Karen returned with the charge nurse and the pediatrician. No one smiled. The charge nurse asked politely, Mrs. Bennett, has anyone besides hospital staff handled your baby's identification bracelet? No. Has anyone removed it? Never. The pediatrician carefully examined the band. Then he looked at the chart. Finally, he exhaled. Someone attempted to replace this bracelet. My blood ran cold. What? Karen answered quietly. The plastic clasp is from a different production batch than the bracelet assigned to your son yesterday. She shook her head in disbelief. I only noticed because I've worked here 32 years. The room fell silent. Had she been even slightly less experienced, no one would have questioned it. The bracelet looked almost perfect. Almost. Margaret slowly reached for my hand. Without raising her voice, she said to the charge nurse, I believe this hospital needs to begin an internal investigation immediately. For the first time since Noah was born, someone besides me understood that this wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had tried to change my baby's identity, and they had come frighteningly close to succeeding. The atmosphere in my hospital room changed within minutes. The charge nurse quietly closed the door. The pediatrician asked another nurse to wheel Noah's bassinet into the staff nursery, where access required electronic badges and every entrance was monitored. I don't want him out of our sight, he said. For the first time since giving birth, I let someone else carry my son away without protesting. Not because I trusted the hospital completely, because I trusted Karen. The look on her face told me she was personally invested now. Someone had tried to violate the sacred routine she'd followed for more than 3 decades. She wasn't going to let it happen again. Hospital administrators arrived before noon. They apologized repeatedly, promised a thorough investigation, and assured me that both of my children would receive additional protection while I remained admitted. One administrator carefully explained that they were notifying state regulators because any suspected tampering with newborn identification required immediate reporting. I appreciated the professionalism, but my mind was somewhere else. Daniel. He still didn't know that the bracelet had been discovered. He still believed, as far as I could tell, that everything was unfolding according to plan. Margaret leaned close while the administrator spoke. That's an advantage. What is? If he thinks the plan succeeded, he'll be less careful. That afternoon, Tom Reynolds returned carrying another thick folder. His expression told me he hadn't brought good news. I've been digging into Daniel's finances. I closed my eyes for a second. How bad? Worse than we expected. He opened the file. For years, Daniel appeared successful. He was on paper. Tom slid several documents across the table. Privately, he accumulated enormous gambling debts. I stared at the figures. The numbers barely seemed real. Credit lines, private loans, cash advances, payments to online betting accounts. Millions of dollars had disappeared over several years. He couldn't have hidden this. He didn't. Tom pointed to another document. He disguised many transactions inside client investment accounts. My stomach dropped. You mean he appears to have stolen from people who trusted him? Mostly retirees, widows, longtime clients. The very people who believed Daniel treated their savings as carefully as he treated his own family. I felt physically sick. Every holiday dinner, every church fundraiser, every neighborhood barbecue where people praised my husband for helping them prepare for retirement, it had all been built on lies. Margaret quietly opened another folder. This concerns your father's trust. I immediately recognized the familiar paperwork. Guy. My father had established the trust after selling his construction company, insisting it would protect future generations of our family. I never really understood all of it. You didn't need to. She adjusted her glasses. The trust was originally designed to benefit you. She turned another page. When Noah was born, a dormant provision automatically activated. What provision? A substantial inheritance earmarked specifically for any future grandchildren. I frowned. So Noah became a beneficiary. Exactly. She looked directly at me. Not through your will. Automatically, the realization hit me almost instantly. If Daniel had been drowning in debt and suddenly learned that Noah's birth unlocked additional family assets, everything changed. The baby changes everything. Those words echoed inside my mind again. Not because Noah himself mattered financially, because his existence unlocked money Daniel desperately needed. Tom nodded slowly. We believe that's why Denise Harper entered the hospital. To steal Noah, perhaps he didn't pretend certainty, but creating confusion about a newborn's identity could delay access to the trust, interfere with guardianship, or create enough legal chaos for forged documents to be introduced. It wouldn't have worked forever, no. He leaned forward. But fraud doesn't always require permanence. Sometimes criminals only need a short window, a few weeks, a few forged signatures, temporary authority, long enough to move money before anyone realized what had happened. I suddenly understood why Daniel had spent months reorganizing our finances. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime born out of panic. It was an elaborate contingency plan. My pregnancy hadn't created the conspiracy. It had accelerated it. Late that evening, Daniel arrived carrying fresh flowers and balloons. He smiled exactly as he always had. How are my favorite people? I looked into his eyes. For 11 years, those eyes had represented home. Now they looked like carefully polished glass. Beautiful, cold, empty. He leaned over to kiss my forehead. I let him. Not because I forgave him, because Margaret had been right. If Daniel believed I remained the trusting wife he'd always known, he might continue revealing the truth one careless step at a time. As he reached into Noah's bassinet and gently touched our son's tiny hand, he smiled with convincing tenderness. Anyone watching would have seen a devoted father. Only I knew I was looking at a man who no longer frightened me because of what he had already done. He frightened me because I still didn't know how far he was willing to go. 3 days later, Noah and I were discharged from the hospital, but we did not go home. That decision broke my heart. For months, I had imagined carrying my son through the front door of the little brick house where Lily had grown up. I had pictured introducing him to the nursery. We had painted pale green together, placing him in the crib Daniel had supposedly built with his own hands, and sitting in the rocking chair beside the window while Lily read him children's books. Instead, Margaret met us at a private hospital exit. There was no celebration, no family photographs, no balloons tied to the car, just a quiet black SUV driven by Tom Reynolds. Lily climbed into the back seat beside me and slipped her small hand into mine. "Are we going home later?" she whispered. I looked at Margaret. She answered gently before I could. "For a little while, sweetheart. We're staying somewhere safe." Lily nodded without arguing. Children often understand more than adults realize. She had stopped asking questions whose answers she already feared. The safe residence belonged to a retired judge who occasionally allowed victims of financial crimes and domestic threats to stay in a private guest cottage on his property. It wasn't a shelter. It looked like an ordinary home tucked behind tall maple trees on the edge of Columbus. There was a small porch, a vegetable garden, and an old golden retriever named Charlie, who immediately decided Lily was his new best friend. For the first time in days, I saw my daughter smile. Only for a moment, but it was enough to remind me that she was still 8 years old. Not a witness, not a protector, just a little girl who should have been worrying about spelling tests instead of conspiracies. Daniel began calling before we had even unpacked. The first voicemail sounded concerned. "Rachel," the hospital said, "you'd already been discharged. Where are you?" "I was bringing dinner." The second sounded confused. "Your phone's going straight to voicemail. Please call me." By the fifth message, his concern had become impatient. "Rachel, this isn't funny. Lily needs to come home." Margaret instructed me not to answer immediately. Let him wonder. So he panics. So he talks. There was a difference. Panic made people reckless. Silence made them feel it. The next morning, she helped me send a brief text. "We're staying with friends while I recover. The baby needs quiet. I'll contact you when I'm ready." Nothing more. No address. No explanation. Daniel replied less than 30 seconds later. "Which friends?" I didn't answer. Another message appeared. "I'll come pick you up." Still nothing. Then came one that made my stomach tighten. "I needed to discuss some paperwork before the bank closes this week." Paperwork? Not us, not Noah, not Lily. Paperwork. Margaret looked over my shoulder and quietly smiled for the first time since this nightmare had begun. He just made his first mistake. Meanwhile, Tom continued investigating Daniel's business. Each day seemed to uncover another layer, another hidden account, another forged signature, another retired couple whose investments had quietly disappeared. Federal financial investigators had now joined the case. Daniel still didn't know. As far as he believed, he was simply trying to persuade his overly emotional wife to come home. One afternoon, I found Lily sitting alone on the porch steps, hugging Charlie around the neck. She looked unusually quiet. I sat beside her, careful not to wake Noah, sleeping in his carrier. After a long silence, she asked, "Mom, yes. Did I ruin our family?" The question stole the air from my lungs. She kept staring at the grass. "If I hadn't listened, if I hadn't told you, maybe Dad wouldn't be in trouble." I turned toward her completely. "Lily," she finally looked at me. There were tears balanced in her eyes. "I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear." "No." I gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "You heard something someone should never have said." She blinked. "But you didn't break this family." I took both of her hands. "The choices that broke this family were made by adults." She began crying quietly. I pulled her into my arms. "You didn't destroy us." I kissed the top of her head exactly as I had when she was little. "You saved us." She buried her face against my shoulder and cried harder than she had at any point since Noah was born. Not from fear, from relief. Sometimes children carry guilt that was never theirs to bear. That afternoon, I made myself another promise. No matter how long this battle lasted, Daniel would answer for what he had done. But Lily would never again have to carry the weight of his choices. 2 weeks passed before the first arrest. It wasn't Daniel's. It was Denise Harper's. Tom called just after breakfast. They picked her up this morning. I was pouring cereal for Lily while Noah slept in his portable bassinet beside the kitchen table. My hand froze. Did she talk? Not at first. And now Tom exhaled slowly. "Now she's asking for an attorney." That wasn't the answer I wanted, but it wasn't the worst one either. People who planned to keep lying rarely asked to negotiate. By then, our days had settled into an unfamiliar routine. Lily attended school remotely from the cottage using a loaner laptop provided by her elementary school. Every afternoon, she walked Charlie around the property, while I fed Noah, or tried to catch an hour of sleep. The judge and his wife treated us like distant relatives instead of frightened guests. Mrs. Harrison often left homemade soup on our porch without knocking. Judge Harrison never asked questions about the investigation. He simply reminded me every evening. Locks are checked. It was a simple sentence. Somehow it made the house feel safer. 3 days after Denise's arrest, Margaret arrived carrying another folder. This one was much thinner. She made a deal. I looked up immediately. What kind of deal? A cooperation agreement. Margaret sat across from me. She admitted she entered the hospital under false credentials. And the bracelet? She carried a duplicate infant identification band. I closed my eyes so Lily remembered correctly. Every detail. Margaret waited before continuing. Denise says Daniel recruited her. The room became perfectly still. Not suspected, not believed, admitted. He promised to pay off her debts. I swallowed hard. What exactly was she supposed to do? Margaret chose her words carefully. According to her statement, she wasn't instructed to harm anyone. That mattered because while Daniel's crimes were horrifying, I wanted the truth, not exaggeration. Her job, Margaret continued, was to create confusion. How? By replacing Noah's identification bracelet and delaying the verification process. So someone else could step in, possibly. She shook her head. She claims Daniel never explained the entire plan. I believed that. People who organize conspiracies rarely share every detail with every participant. The hospital's internal investigation moved just as quickly. One employee admitted allowing Denise through a restricted entrance in exchange for cash. Nascus. Another confessed to deleting 11 minutes of hallway surveillance footage. Neither claimed to know Daniel personally. Both admitted they had been instructed by Denise. The chain was becoming clearer. Not perfect, but clear enough. The biggest development came a week later. Federal agents executed search warrants at Daniel's financial office before it opened for business. Television news helicopters circled overhead. Neighbors called one another. Former clients gathered on the sidewalk in stunned silence. By lunchtime, every major local station was reporting the story. The headline wasn't about the hospital, it was about investment fraud. Authorities alleged that Daniel had stolen millions of dollars from elderly clients over several years. The hospital investigation appeared only halfway through the news report. To the public, Daniel looked like another respected financial advisor who had betrayed the trust of people preparing for retirement. Only a handful of investigators understood how close that financial desperation had come to destroying my family as well. Months later, I finally saw Daniel again. Not across a dinner table, not in our living room, across a courtroom. He wore a gray suit instead of the expensive navy ones he had always preferred. His hair was shorter. His shoulders looked heavier. He glanced toward me exactly once. Then he looked away. The prosecutor asked me to describe the day Noah was born. I answered calmly. I repeated only what I had personally seen, only what I had personally heard. Nothing more, nothing less. Margaret had reminded me countless times that truthful testimony didn't need embellishment. The facts were powerful enough. Daniel's attorney chose not to question Lily. The judge had already ruled that her earlier recorded interview conducted with a child forensic specialist was sufficient. When I heard that decision, I quietly thanked God. She had already carried enough. She deserved to stay a child. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I looked once more at the man I had loved for 11 years. I expected anger, hatred. Instead, I felt something much quieter. Grief. Not for the husband sitting at the defense table. For the husband I had believed existed, because I finally understood they had never been the same man. The verdict was returned on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I remember the weather, because it matched the heaviness that had settled over everyone in the courtroom. No one celebrated. There were no dramatic outbursts, no applause, no triumphant speeches, like the ones television loves to show. Real justice rarely looks like that. It looks like ordinary people sitting silently while lives change forever. The jury found Daniel guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, investment fraud, conspiracy, and related financial crimes. The separate charges connected to the hospital conspiracy would be resolved through additional proceedings. But Denise Harper's testimony, the deleted surveillance records, the altered identification bracelet, and the financial evidence had already painted a devastating picture. Daniel closed his eyes as the verdict was read. For just a moment, he looked like a tired, broken man. Then I remembered the retired couples whose savings had disappeared. I remembered the mothers who trusted that maternity ward. Most of all, I remembered an 8-year-old girl pulling her injured mother beneath a hospital bed. Compassion did not erase accountability. Thea Evelyn's case ended differently. She accepted a plea agreement after admitting she had knowledge of the conspiracy and had chosen to remain silent instead of stopping it. She received probation, community service, financial penalties, and a permanent prohibition from serving as a trustee or financial guardian. Some people asked whether I was disappointed she avoided prison. I wasn't. At 72, she would spend the rest of her life living with the consequences of her own decisions. Justice does not always require the harshest punishment. It requires the right one. The civil lawsuits unfolded over the following year. Former clients recovered part of their stolen retirement savings through insurance claims, court-ordered restitution, and the liquidation of Daniel's remaining assets. It wasn't enough to restore every lost dollar, but it was enough to restore something just as valuable: hope. Several of those couples wrote me letters, not because I had recovered their money, because exposing Daniel had prevented him from victimizing anyone else. One letter from an 80-year-old widow stayed with me. She wrote, "I thought I was foolish for trusting him. Thank you for proving that kindness isn't foolish. Dishonesty is." I kept that letter in my bedside drawer. Whenever the guilt tried to creep back in, whenever I wondered how I could have lived beside a man without seeing who he really was, I read those words again. The hospital also faced its own reckoning. They publicly acknowledged failures in visitor screening and internal oversight. New electronic safeguards were added to every maternity unit entrance. Identification procedures became stricter. Staff received additional training on newborn security. Karen called me a few months later. "I thought you'd like to know," she said. "We've named the updated protocol after the first nurse who caught the bracelet discrepancy." I smiled. "You?" She laughed softly. "No," the committee insisted. I couldn't think of anyone more deserving. One experienced nurse had trusted her instincts instead of assuming everything was fine. Because of that, countless families would be safer. When the final civil judgment was entered, Margaret helped me make one last decision. A portion of the damages awarded to me legally belonged to our family. Another portion represented compensation for what Noah and I had endured. I could have invested every penny. Instead, I established the Noah Bennett Family Safety Fund. It wasn't large enough to change the world, but it provided grants to hospitals across central Ohio for newborn security education, volunteer family advocates, and emergency assistance for mothers recovering from traumatic births. "It feels right," Margaret said after signing the paperwork. "It feels like Dad would approve. I think he already does." That evening, Lily helped me water flowers outside the cottage before we finally prepared to move into a new home. She looked up at me and smiled. A real smile, the kind I hadn't seen in many months. "You know what? I don't feel scared all the time anymore." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Neither did I. Not because the past had disappeared, because justice had finally made room for peace. 1 year later, I stood in the backyard of our new home, watching Noah smash his tiny hands into the frosting of his first birthday cake. He laughed so hard that he nearly tipped out of his high chair. Everyone laughed with him. Lily laughed the loudest. For a long moment, I simply stood there with my paper plate untouched, letting the sound wash over me. A year earlier, I had been hiding beneath a hospital bed, praying my children, and I would survive whatever nightmare was unfolding around us. Now, I was watching both of them chase bubbles across a quiet backyard on a warm Ohio afternoon. Life hadn't returned to what it had been. It had become something entirely different, something stronger. The guest list was small. Mrs. Carter stood beside the grill, talking with Judge and Mrs. Harrison. Karen stopped by after finishing her hospital shift, carrying a children's book instead of another stuffed animal. Margaret arrived last. exactly 10 minutes late as always, pretending traffic was responsible when everyone knew she simply hated arriving early to parties. Tom came too. He no longer carried folders every time I saw him. Instead, he carried balloons. That seemed like a much healthier habit. As I looked around the yard, I realized something important. Not one person there had been connected to us by obligation. They were there because when our lives fell apart, they chose to help. Sometimes family is built by blood, sometimes it is built by character. I understood the difference now. The divorce had been finalized months earlier. I kept the house. Daniel surrendered parental rights to Noah as part of the final court orders after lengthy legal proceedings. While Lily's future contact with him remained subject to the family court's careful supervision and the recommendations of her therapist, those decisions had not been made to punish him. They had been made to protect two children. There is an important difference. I never celebrated his prison sentence. I never taught Lily to hate her father. Whenever she asked questions, I answered honestly but carefully. Your father made very serious choices. Can people change? She asked once. I hope they can. Will he? I looked out the kitchen window before answering. I don't know. That was the truth. Real healing begins when we stop pretending to know things only time can answer. One afternoon, a few weeks after Noah's birthday, Lily and I drove past Riverside Hospital. She recognized it immediately. Mom, I know. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she quietly said, I still remember hiding under the bed. So do I. I thought if I made one sound, her voice became smaller. They'd find us. I reached across the center console and squeezed her hand. You were terrified. I was. She smiled a little, but I wasn't thinking about me, I know. We sat in the parking lot without getting out. The building looked ordinary. People walked in, carrying flowers. Others walked out, carrying newborn babies. Most of them would never know how close one little family had come to losing everything inside those walls. And that was exactly how it should be. Hospitals should be places where hope begins, not where fear takes root. That evening, after Noah had fallen asleep, and Lily was finishing her homework at the kitchen table, she suddenly looked up. Mom, yes. Do you still think about that day? I smiled before answering. Not because the memory no longer hurt, because it had finally become something more than pain. Every single day, she waited, because that was the day my daughter became the bravest person I've ever known. She rolled her eyes the way only an 8-year-old could. I was just scared. Courage isn't the absence of fear. I reached across the table and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It's choosing to protect someone even when you're frightened. She thought about that for a moment. Then she stood, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around me. I love you, Mom. I love you too. Noah stirred in his crib down the hall, then settled again. The house became wonderfully quiet. For the first time in a very long time, silence no longer felt dangerous. It felt like peace. Looking back now, I understand that evil rarely announces itself. Sometimes it wears an expensive suit. Sometimes it brings flowers into a hospital room. Sometimes it smiles for family photographs. The greatest mistake we can make is believing that love requires us to ignore what our instincts are trying to tell us. Trust is precious, but wisdom must always stand beside it. The revenge I wanted was never about making Daniel suffer. It was about making certain he could never again betray another family, another retiree, another innocent child. Justice gave me that. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, wasn't pretending nothing had happened. It was refusing to let what's happened define the rest of our lives. If my story leaves you with anything, I hope it's this. Listen when something inside you says that something isn't right. Pay attention to the quiet people who notice what everyone else overlooks. And never underestimate the courage of a child whose heart is guided by love. Thank you for spending this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment when trusting your instincts changed your life? If so, your story may encourage someone else who needs that reminder today. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about courage, justice, family, and second chances, please consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey. Take good care of yourself and the people who truly deserve your trust. At a backyard barbecue, My husband's stepdaughter pointed her finger in my face and barked. "Do your job, maid." I snapped, "Watch your mouth." My husband rushed over, slapped me, and yelled, "You're nothing but a poor freeloader. Get out of my house." I didn't say a word. I quietly packed my things and left. The next morning he called me in a panic. For the first time in my life, I heard my husband crying. "My name is Claire Whitmore, and for 10 years, I was married to a man who believed a house belonged to whoever spoke the loudest inside it." My husband, Grant Whitmore, owned Whitmore Home Solutions, a mid-sized HVAC and plumbing company outside Nashville. If you asked him, he built that business from the ground up, with grit, charm, and an old Ford pickup that had more rust than paint when he started. That was the story he liked to tell at barbecues, Rotary Club breakfasts, and church fundraiser dinners. Usually with one hand wrapped around a glass of bourbon, and the other resting on my shoulder like I was part of the furniture. People loved Grant. He had that easy American confidence some men wear like a leather jacket, weathered, familiar, just dangerous enough to make strangers trust him. He remembered names, slapped backs, bought rounds, donated to Little League teams, and could sell a nervous homeowner a new air unit before the sweet tea got warm. I was quieter, not shy exactly, but careful. I listened before I spoke. I read contracts before anyone signed them. I remembered which technician had a sick mother, which customer hated being called before noon, which supplier would extend us 3 days if I asked politely, and which one needed everything in writing. Mio Grant called that office stuff, as if the office was a junk drawer where small things disappeared. But small things keep a life from collapsing. When I first married him, his company had 12 employees, 2 trucks, a part-time bookkeeper, and a stack of unpaid invoices in a shoebox under his desk. By our 10th anniversary, we had 38 employees, 6 service vans, a commercial maintenance contract with 3 hospital clinics, and enough steady cash flow that Grant started calling himself a local business leader. He wore that phrase like a crown. I had no title. At first, I helped because I loved him. Then, I helped because the business needed me. Eventually, I helped because if I stopped, payroll might not run, insurance might lapse, licensing renewals might be missed, or some desperate customer might call on a freezing January night and find nobody on the other end who knew what to do. The Grant never asked me to quit my job as an office manager at a dental practice. He just kept saying, "Baby, I need you this week," until 1 week turned into a decade. His daughter Madison was 6 when I met her. She had skinny legs, big brown eyes, and a habit of sleeping with one fist closed around the sleeve of my pajama shirt after her mother dropped her off late on Friday nights. Back then, she called me Miss Claire, and I never pushed for more. I braided her hair badly, packed lunches she sometimes forgot in the car, sat through rainy soccer games, and learned which dinosaur chicken nuggets she considered acceptable, and which ones were, in her words, fake nuggets. For a long time, I thought love could grow quietly enough that nobody would feel threatened by it. I was wrong. As Madison got older, Grant changed the story of our household. Not all at once. That would have been too easy to notice. It happened in jokes, little corrections, throwaway lines, he said with a smile. "Claire likes to stay busy. Don't worry, she runs the paperwork. She's good with the boring stuff." Then, after a profitable year, when he bought the house on Oak Hollow Lane and put a stone fire pit in the backyard, the language sharpened. My house, my company, my money. At first I told myself he did not mean it that way. Men like Grant loved the sound of ownership. Maybe it made him feel safe. But the words soaked into the walls. They soaked into Madison too. By 16, she had become beautiful in a hard, polished way, with expensive highlights, acrylic nails, and the kind of teenage confidence that came from knowing her father would blame anyone but her. She no longer asked me for help. She demanded it. She left dishes on the counter and laundry in the hallway, then rolled her eyes when I reminded her she was old enough to clean up after herself. Grant always laughed. "She's a kid, Claire. She's under pressure. Don't be so sensitive." That Saturday in June we hosted the company barbecue. Grant loved those parties because they let him perform success in front of an audience. The backyard was strung with cafe lights. The smoker had been running since dawn, and folding tables lined the patio under red, white, and blue cloths, Even though the 4th of July was still 2 weeks away, employees came with spouses and kids. Neighbors drifted in. Grant's golf buddies stood near the cooler, pretending not to compare trucks. I had been on my feet since 6 that morning. I marinated chicken, chopped slaw, refilled ice, found sunscreen for a technician's toddler, and changed the propane tank after Grant discovered it was empty and announced, "Claire's, got it," without looking at me. Around 4 o'clock, Madison came outside with 2 of her friends. They were dressed like they had wandered into the wrong event. White crop tops, denim shorts, sunglasses pushed into their hair. Madison looked at the food table, then at me. "Where are the gluten-free buns?" I wiped my hands on it. "In the kitchen pantry. Second shelf, you can grab them." She blinked at me like I had spoken in another language. "I'm not going inside. My friends are here." "Then your friends can wait 30 seconds. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment but from the insult of being expected to do something herself. A few people nearby went quiet. Grant was across the yard holding court by the smoker, laughing too loudly at something his buddy had said. Madison took a step closer. She pointed her finger in my face the way she had seen her father point at subcontractors when he wanted them to feel small. "Do your job, maid." The whole backyard seemed to inhale. For 1 second, I saw the little girl who used to fall asleep against me during thunderstorms. Then I saw the young woman standing in front of me, cruel, because she had been taught that cruelty was power. I heard my own voice come out low and sharp. "Watch your mouth." Madison's face twisted. "Dad." Grant was there before I could take another breath. He did not ask what happened. He did not look at my face. He did not look at the finger still hanging in the air between us. He just raised his hand and slapped me. It was not the hardest hit in the world, but it was loud. Loud enough that the children stopped running. Loud enough that a paper plate slid from someone's hand and hit the grass. Loud enough that whatever was left of my marriage cracked open in front of everyone. Grant's eyes were wild, but not with guilt, with anger that I had embarrassed him. "You're nothing but a poor freeloader," he shouted. "You hear me? You live in my house, eat my food, spend my money, and now you think you can disrespect my daughter? Get out! Get out of my house!" No one moved. I touched my cheek. It was hot beneath my fingers. For years I had imagined what I would do if Grant finally crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I thought I might scream. I thought I might cry. I thought I might tell everyone what I had done for that company, that house, that child. But when the moment came, something inside me went perfectly still. I looked at Madison. Her mouth was open now, and for the first time that afternoon, she looked scared. Then I looked at Grant. "All right," I said. That was all. I walked past him, through the sliding glass door, into the house I had decorated room by room, paycheck by paycheck, season by season. The kitchen smelled like smoke and lemon cleaner. A tray of deviled eggs sat on the island, untouched. My purse hung on the chair where I always left it. Upstairs, I took one suitcase from the closet and packed like a woman leaving a hotel, not a marriage. Jeans, blouses, medication, phone charger, my mother's pearl earrings, the folder with my birth certificate, passport, and old tax records, my laptop from the desk, a framed photo of Madison at 8 years old, holding a lopsided birthday cake we had baked together, stayed behind. I did not take Grant's money. I did not take company files. I did not take revenge. When I came downstairs, the backyard was still quiet. Through the glass, I could see Grant pacing, one hand on his hip, his face red with the effort of pretending he was in control. Then Madison stood near the food table, arms folded tight across her chest. I placed my house key on the kitchen island. Then I walked out the front door. My friend Diane lived 20 minutes away, in a small brick ranch with hydrangeas along the porch, and a guest room she had been telling me to use for 3 years. When she opened the door and saw my face, she did not ask a single question. She just stepped aside and said, "Come in, honey." That night, I turned my phone to silent and laid it face down on the nightstand. For the first time in years, I did not check the payroll calendar. I did not answer a vendor email. I did not remind Grant about Monday's inspection or the insurance certificate due by noon. I simply closed my eyes and let the house I had held together stand on its own. I woke up before sunrise out of habit, my body still convinced it needed to beat everyone else to the day. For a few seconds, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling in Diane's guest room, I reached toward the nightstand, expecting to see my planner, my reading glasses, and the legal pad where I kept the company's weekly priority. Instead, there was only my phone, face down, silent. I left it that way. From the kitchen downstairs came the smell of fresh coffee and buttered toast. Diane had already let her golden retriever into the backyard, and country music played softly from an old radio on the windowsill. She looked up when I walked in. "You sleep at all?" "A little." She slid a mug toward me without another question. Some friendships earn the right to silence. Diane and I had worked together years earlier before I married Grant. She knew enough about my marriage to recognize that if I had actually walked away, something irreversible had happened. After a while, she finally asked, "You planning to go back?" I looked out her kitchen window. "I honestly don't know." She nodded once. "Then don't decide today." That might have been the wisest thing anyone had said to me in years. At 7:42 a.m., my phone vibrated for the first time. "Grant." I didn't answer. A minute later, another call came, then another, then a text. "Where are the payroll files?" I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking it again. The payroll files weren't missing. They had never been mine. They belonged to the company. They were exactly where they had always been. What Grant didn't know was how to access them because he had never cared to learn. By 8, another message appeared. "Claire, call me. No apology. No concern. Just another problem to solve." I put the phone back on the table and finished my coffee. Diane watched me carefully. "You going to answer?" "No." "What if it's important?" I smiled sadly. Everything was always important. That was the problem. For 10 years, every emergency had somehow become my emergency. A technician locked out of a supply warehouse. A customer threatening legal action. A bank asking for documentation. Grant forgetting to renew a license. Madison needing a permission slip signed before school. Everyone had learned the same lesson. Call Claire. Claire will fix it. Around 8:30, my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Grant. It was Melissa, our payroll coordinator. I hesitated before answering. "Hi, Melissa." Her voice sounded relieved. "Oh, thank God. Claire, where are you? I'm taking a personal day." There was a pause. Then she lowered her voice. "Grant can't get into payroll." I closed my eyes. "He has administrator access?" "I know. He just has to log into the portal. He says he doesn't know which portal." Of course he didn't. For years he had proudly told people he stayed away from computer nonsense. He thought that made him sound like a hands-on businessman. It actually meant someone else quietly handled everything that kept 38 families paid on time. Melissa spoke again. "Should I walk him through it?" "You work for yes. Then follow company policy." Another pause. "You mean I means exactly what I said." She understood. She wasn't asking me because she couldn't help. She was asking because everyone was used to me making difficult situations disappear before anyone noticed them. After we hung up, I felt strangely calm. Not victorious, not angry, just free. At 9:07, another call. This time from Linda at First State Bank. I almost laughed. Grant had forgotten there was a quarterly credit review scheduled that morning. Not because he wasn't told, because I had always reminded him. I let it go to voicemail. 9 minutes later, another call. Our commercial insurance broker. Then the attorney who handled our service contracts. Then 2 supervisors. By 10, my voicemail box was almost holy cow. I shook my head. "They're not looking for me." "What do you mean?" "They're looking for the person who keeps everyone connected." She frowned. "I don't understand." I thought about it for a moment. "Imagine an orchestra." She nodded. The violinists know their music. The drummer knows his. The pianist knows hers. But if the conductor disappears, everybody starts playing at different times. Exactly. Grant always believed he was conducting. The truth was he'd been giving speeches from the stage while someone else quietly kept everyone together. Around 11, Melissa texted me again. "Payroll processed late. Employees are asking questions." 5 minutes later, "Commercial account can't release funds until Grant signs revised paperwork. He doesn't know what they're talking about." Another. "Hospital contract manager wants updated insurance certificate today." Then, "Vendor suspended this afternoon's equipment delivery until paperwork is corrected." I stared at the growing list. None of these problems existed because I had sabotaged anything. Every deadline had existed yesterday. Every document had been waiting. Every procedure had always required attention. I had simply stopped catching them before they hit the ground. That realization hit me harder than Grant's slap. For years, I hadn't just been helping. I'd been preventing disasters no one else even knew existed. At noon, Diane suggested we leave the house. "You need air." She drove us to a little cafe near the courthouse where retired couples lingered over soup and pie. For the first time in months, I ate lunch without checking my email every 5 minutes. Halfway through my sandwich, my phone rang again. Grant, then immediately again, then again. I finally answered on the fourth call. I didn't say hello. His breathing filled the line before his words did. "Claire," his voice sounded different. Not softer, smaller. "Where are the Johnson maintenance contracts?" "In the contract management system. I can't find them. You've had access for 6 years. I don't remember the password. You can reset it." Silence. "Then, the bank says they need you." "They don't need me. They asked for you. They asked for whoever handles commercial lending." Another silence. I could almost picture him rubbing his forehead the way he always did when things stopped making sense. Then he asked the question that surprised me. "What do I do?" Not "where are you?" Not "when are you coming home?" Just "what do I do?" For a brief moment, I almost answered. Almost. Habit is powerful. For 10 years, hearing Grant say those words automatically made my brain search for solutions. Then I remembered standing in our backyard. Remembered the sting on my cheek. Remembered Madison pointing at me like I wasn't family. "No, Grant." "What?" "You'll have to figure it out, Claire." I ended the call. My hand trembled afterward, not because I regretted it, because I had never done that before. Diane reached across the table. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. I think I stopped. "What?" "I think that was the first time in 10 years I didn't rescue him." She smiled. "About time." That afternoon, I turned my phone completely off. Not forever. Just long enough to discover whether the world really ended when Claire Whitmore wasn't there to hold it together. It didn't, but somewhere across town, the first domino had already fallen, and neither Grant nor I yet understood how many were standing behind it. By Monday morning, I had been gone for barely 48 hours. The company was still open. The service vans were still rolling out before sunrise. The phones were still ringing. From the outside, Whitmore Home Solutions looked exactly the same. That was the deceptive thing about foundations. You don't notice them until they begin to crack. I spent the morning helping Diane plant tomatoes in the raised beds behind her garage. My hands welcomed the ordinary rhythm of pressing seedlings into warm Tennessee soil, watering them, brushing dirt from my jeans. For the first time in years, nobody interrupted me every 10 minutes with a problem that somehow belonged to me. At 11, I turned my phone back on. It exploded with notifications. 32 missed calls, 57 text messages, 9 voicemails. I ignored Grant's messages first. Instead, I opened one from Melissa. "Can we meet? Just for coffee, off the clock." I answered with a simple yes. An hour later, we sat in a quiet coffee shop downtown. The kind where college students worked on laptops and retirees solved crossword puzzles by the window. Melissa looked exhausted. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I almost didn't. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "The office feels different." "How?" She searched for the right word. "Like everyone suddenly realized how much they don't know." I didn't answer. She continued. "Grant keeps asking where everything is. It hasn't moved." "I know. He keeps saying the systems are too complicated." "They're not." "They're not," she admitted. "They're organized exactly the way you built them." "Get Clear's throat." I smiled faintly. "I built them so anyone could follow them." She looked at me for several long seconds. "That's the thing." "What?" "They can." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Everyone knows their own part. The payroll process, the dispatch schedule, the maintenance renewals, the licensing calendar. We all know our own jobs." She hesitated. "But nobody knows how all of it connects." That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. I had never tried to become indispensable. Quite the opposite. Every spreadsheet, every checklist, every calendar reminder existed because I wanted the company to survive without depending on one person. But there was one thing I had never managed to delegate: judgment. When 2 deadlines collided, when a technician called in sick, when a customer threatened to cancel, when the bank wanted additional documentation while payroll had to clear before noon. Someone had to decide what mattered first. That wasn't written in any manual. Melissa sighed. Yesterday Grant spent 45 minutes yelling because dispatch couldn't find an invoice. It was in the cloud. I know. He was searching the filing cabinets. I couldn't help laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was painfully predictable. Grant always believed the solution to confusion was volume. If something didn't work, he spoke louder. If someone disagreed, he spoke harder. He had spent years believing confidence could replace competence. Melissa stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. The technicians are nervous. Why? They've never seen him like this. What do you mean? He isn't leading. She lowered her voice. He's reacting. That was a dangerous difference. Leaders make decisions before panic spreads. People in panic chase one emergency after another until everything feels urgent. Grant had entered that second stage. Before we left, Melissa reached into her purse and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. I probably shouldn't give you this. What is it? A list. I unfolded it. Every item represented something that had gone wrong since Saturday. Commercial insurance renewal delayed. Lee Hospital maintenance contract awaiting approval. Equipment supplier requesting updated purchase authorization. Vehicle registration missing documentation. Quarterly tax review postponed. 3 customer complaints. 2 scheduling conflicts. Emergency overtime approvals pending. None of them alone could destroy a business. Together they formed a slow-moving avalanche. I handed the paper back. No. She blinked. What? I don't need it. I thought I know, but if I take that list, you'll start fixing it. I nodded. And that's exactly what can't happen. Melissa looked down. I think everyone expected you'd come back Monday. So did Grant? Are you? I looked out the cafe window. Across the street, an older couple was walking hand in hand toward the courthouse square. They weren't in a hurry. They weren't arguing. They simply looked peaceful. I don't know. It was the truth. I wasn't staying away to punish Grant. I was staying away because I still didn't know whether I wanted to return to a life where my value depended on how many disasters I prevented before breakfast. That afternoon, I finally listened to Grant's voicemails. The first one was angry. Claire, stop acting ridiculous and call me. The second was impatient. The insurance people need information. The third sounded tired. I can't find the renewal folder. The fourth was different. I talked to the hospital administrator today. His voice cracked slightly. They said they always worked things out with you. A long silence, then another message. The bank asked for you. Another. The attorney asked if you were coming back. Another. The supplier said they trusted your judgment. Each voicemail peeled away another layer of certainty. Not because people preferred me, because they had quietly built professional relationships with the person who consistently solved problems. That Grant had always assumed those relationships belonged to him. Now he was discovering they had trusted the work, not the title. Late Tuesday afternoon, another call came. This time from Eric, our senior service technician. Eric had been with the company longer than Grant and I had been married. He almost never called me outside business hours. Hey, Claire. Hi, Eric. I just wanted you to know. He stopped. What? The guys miss you. I miss them too. It ain't just that. I waited. You know what everybody's saying? No. They're saying this place feels mean now. His words caught me off guard. Mean? Yeah. Nobody's smiling. Everybody's walking on eggshells. He keeps blaming people. I closed my eyes. Grant had always blamed outward before looking inward. When I was there, I quietly absorbed most of that frustration before it reached everyone else. Without realizing it, I hadn't only been managing operations. I'd been protecting people. Eric cleared his throat. I probably shouldn't be saying all this. You've earned the right. He chuckled sadly. You know why I stayed 15 years? I figured it was because Grant paid well. Nah. So why? Because every time my wife got sick, you made sure I could leave early. He continued before I could answer. When my truck broke down, you loaned me yours. When my daughter got into Vanderbilt, you organized that surprise bonus. I had forgotten half of those moments. To me, they had simply been the decent thing to do. Eric's voice softened. I don't think Grant even knows you did any of that. No, he doesn't. I don't think he ever asked. After we hung up, I sat alone on Diane's back porch until the sun slipped below the trees. For years, I had believed my work disappeared the moment it was finished. A payroll processed, a crisis avoided, a contract renewed. Invisible work. Invisible woman. But maybe kindness leaves records no spreadsheet can track. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Grant was finally beginning to see what everyone else had quietly known all along. The company hadn't been running because one man stood at the front. It had been running because someone, unseen by almost everyone, had spent 10 years making sure everyone else could do their jobs. And now, for the first time, that invisible foundation was gone. Wednesday morning, I found myself standing in front of my bedroom closet at Diane's house, staring at two blouses, as though choosing one over the other might somehow answer the questions that had been following me. Since Saturday, neither one did. I picked the blue one anyway. Diane glanced up from the newspaper when I walked into the kitchen. You going somewhere? I have an appointment with my attorney. She smiled faintly. Good, I feel guilty. You shouldn't. I know, but I do. She folded the newspaper carefully. Claire, guilt is what decent people feel when they stop allowing themselves to be used. That sentence followed me all morning. My attorney, Rachel Donovan, specialized in family law. She had represented two women I knew through church, both of whom had spent years convincing themselves they were overreacting. Rachel didn't ask whether I wanted revenge. She asked practical questions. Do you have copies of your financial records? Yes. Were you paid as an employee? No. She looked over the rim of her glasses. For 10 years? I nodded. She sighed. We'll talk about that. When the meeting ended, she handed me a folder. You don't have to make every decision today. I'm not trying to destroy him. I know. Then what am I trying to do? Rachel answered without hesitation. You're trying to stop disappearing. I drove away with those words echoing in my head. By the time I reached Diane's driveway, my phone was ringing again. This time it wasn't Grant. It was Frank's Ellis. Frank owned Ellis Mechanical Supply, the company that had supplied Whitmore Home Solutions with equipment for nearly 15 years. I answered. Frank, Claire. His deep voice carried the weariness of a man who had spent decades running a business. I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. I heard what happened. News traveled fast in small business circles. I appreciate the call. There was a brief silence. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Are you coming back? I looked toward Diane's garden. I honestly don't know. Frank exhaled slowly, I figured. Why? Because if you're not, he stopped. I'm changing our credit terms. That surprised me. You've trusted Grant for years. I trusted your judgment for years. I didn't know what to say, Frank continued. Whenever Grant promised something, I waited to hear from you. If you confirmed it, I knew we'd get paid. I knew the numbers made sense. I knew somebody had actually checked the order. I leaned against the porch railing. You never told me that. You never asked. After we hung up, I sat quietly for several minutes. Grant had always believed respect came from confidence. Again and again, people were showing me something different, and respect came from consistency. Late that afternoon, another unexpected visitor arrived. Melissa. She looked even more exhausted than she had the day before. I know I shouldn't be here. You can come in. She sat at Diane's kitchen table while I made iced tea. I almost quit today. I turned around. What happened? Grant. She rubbed her temples. He spent 20 minutes yelling because nobody could find the revised hospital contract. It was in the digital archive. I know. He said someone must have deleted it. Did anyone? She shook her head. It was exactly where you labeled it. I couldn't help smiling. What? He never learned the filing system. She laughed once. No, he never tried. Her smile disappeared almost immediately. Claire. What? I need to tell you something. I sat across from her. Yesterday the hospital's facilities director came in. My stomach tightened. Okay. He asked where you were. What did Grant say? He told him you'd taken some personal time. And? Melissa hesitated. The director looked at Grant and said she swallowed. Well, I hope she comes back. She's the reason we've renewed that contract every year. The room fell silent. I stared at the condensation running down my glass. I never negotiated those contracts. No. You built the relationship. I remembered dozens of early morning meetings, handwritten birthday cards to office managers, checking in after storms to make sure their buildings were safe, solving small problems before they became expensive ones. None, it had seemed extraordinary. It had simply seemed professional. Melissa looked down at her hands. There's more. I braced myself. The technicians had a meeting this morning. Was Grant there? They asked him not to be. That caught me completely off guard. What? They wanted to talk privately. What about? She reached into her purse and handed me a folded sheet of paper. I know you said you didn't want documents. What is this? Read it. I unfolded the page. 34 signatures. Every field technician, every installer, every dispatcher, every office employee except Grant. At the top, someone had typed a single sentence. If Claire Whitmore is not treated with the respect she deserves, we cannot promise this company will keep the people who made it successful. I read it twice. Then a third time. They did this? Melissa nodded. Nobody asked them to. I didn't. We know. They're angry. I don't want them quitting. They're not trying to hurt the company. They're trying to protect the person who always protected them. My vision blurred. Not because of the signatures, because I had spent years believing no one noticed. Apparently, they had noticed everything. That evening, as the sun settled behind the trees, my phone rang once more. Grant. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he said quietly, I went into the office today. I figured. I found a letter. What letter? The employees. I closed my eyes. They signed it. Yes. His voice sounded hollow. I didn't know. What? They respected you like that? I said nothing. I thought he stopped. I honestly thought they stayed because I built a good company. I waited. They stayed because of you. The admission sounded as though it physically hurt him. Another long silence stretched between us. Then he asked a question unlike any he had asked before. Claire? Yes. Was I really that blind? I looked out across Diane's backyard. The tomato plants we had planted 2 days earlier were already standing a little straighter. Sometimes all living things needed was room. I don't think you wanted to see it. His breathing caught. I don't know how to fix this. For the first time since I had walked away, I believed him. He wasn't asking where a file was or how to reset a password or which customer needed calling. He was asking something much harder. How do you rebuild trust after spending years tearing down the person who quietly built your life? I didn't have an answer. Neither did he. And perhaps that was exactly where true accountability had to begin. Grant did not come to Diane's house that night. For that, I was grateful. There are moments in a marriage when a person finally says the right thing, but the wound is too deep for the right thing to become a bridge. His question stayed with me long after the call ended. Was I really that blind? The honest answer was yes. But blindness is not always an accident. Sometimes people close their eyes because seeing the truth would require them to change. The next morning, I met Rachel again. She had reviewed the financial records, the mortgage documents, the tax returns, and the years of unpaid labor I had poured into Grant's company. She did not look shocked this time. She looked prepared. You have options, she said. I don't want to ruin him. Rachel leaned back in her chair. Claire, divorce is not ruin. Accountability is not cruelty. Taking your lawful share is not revenge. I looked down at my hands. Then why does it feel like I'm punishing him? Because you spent 10 years believing his comfort was your responsibility. That landed somewhere deep. By noon, Rachel filed the initial paperwork. Nothing dramatic, no screaming in a courtroom, no secret fortune revealed, just a legal line drawn where emotional boundaries had failed. Grant was served that afternoon. He called once. I did not answer. Instead, I drove to a quiet walking trail by the river and sat on a bench beneath a maple tree listening to cicadas hum in the heat. For the first time since Saturday, I let myself cry. Not because I missed the life I had left, but because I was finally grieving the woman I had been inside it. That evening, Madison texted me, "Can we talk?" I stared at those 3 words for a long time, then I wrote back, "Tomorrow, public place, 30 minutes. We met at a small ice cream shop near her high school. Madison arrived without makeup, wearing an oversized sweatshirt, despite the heat. She looked younger than 16, younger than the girl who had pointed at me in the backyard. She sat across from me and twisted a napkin in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I waited. I know that's not enough. No, I said gently, it isn't. Her eyes filled. I found emails. What emails? The ones about my summer program and the scholarship forms. And when Mom forgot to send my medical records for camp, I remembered all of it. She swallowed hard. You did all that? Yes, and I called you a maid. The word hung between us, ugly and small. Madison began crying, not loudly, but with the helpless shame of someone finally seeing herself clearly. I thought Dad was the one who handled everything. I know. He said you like doing that stuff. I did like helping you. She looked up. But not being treated like nothing. I said nothing because she needed to hear herself say it. Madison wiped her face with her sleeve. Are you ever going to forgive me? I don't know. Her face crumpled. But I hope one day I can. That was the truth. Not punishment, not a performance, just truth. 2 weeks later, Grant asked to meet me at Rachel's office. He looked different when he walked in. Not physically, exactly, though he had lost weight and his shirt hung loose at the collar. It was his posture. The old Grant entered rooms like applause was already waiting. This Grant looked for a chair before his legs gave out. He sat across from me. No bourbon confidence, no loud voice, no audience. Just a man and the consequences he had earned. I'm not asking you to come back, he said. Good. He nodded, accepting the blow. I thought I built everything. I looked at him calmly. No, Grant, we built it. His eyes reddened. The difference is I never needed everyone to know. He covered his mouth with his hand. For a long moment, he could not speak. Then he whispered, I'm sorry. I believed he meant it. I also knew sorry could not unring a slap, unteach a daughter's cruelty, or return 10 years of invisible labor. So I said, I hope you become the kind of man who never makes another woman prove her worth by leaving. That was the closest thing to mercy I had left. The divorce took 6 months. I received a fair settlement, including compensation tied to my role in growing the business. And Grant kept Whitmore Home Solutions, though not the empire he had imagined. He sold the big house on Oak Hollow Lane, moved into a smaller place near the office, and hired an operations manager at a salary that would have made him furious if anyone had suggested paying me the same 5 years earlier. Several employees stayed, some left. The company survived, but humbler. So did he. Madison and I did not become mother and daughter again overnight. Life is not that neat. But once a month, she asked me to meet for coffee, and sometimes she told me about school, college applications, and the slow, uncomfortable work of becoming kinder than the house that raised her. As for me, I opened a small consulting firm, helping family-owned businesses build systems that did not depend on invisible sacrifice. My first client was a widow who ran a roofing company with her 2 sons. My second was a bakery owner who had not taken a vacation in 12 years. I taught them what I had learned the hard way. If one person is holding everything together, the business is not strong. It is standing on a person no one remembered to thanking. People sometimes asked if I got my revenge. I did, but not the way they meant. I did not burn Grant's life down. I simply stopped standing inside the fire with a bucket in my hands. And when I walked away, everything he had built on my silence finally had to bear its own weight. Sometimes revenge is not destruction. Sometimes revenge is letting the truth walk into the room after you leave. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll remember this. Never mistake quiet loyalty for weakness. And never take for granted the person who keeps your world from falling apart. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one.